The hallway was cold and dark and silent except for the hum of machines and the soft steps of boots on metal floors. Mason Lee walked the same path every night after his shift ended in the lower decks of the mining station called Archies 12. The air always smelled like oil and smoke and rust, but that night something felt different. As he turned the corner near the old storage bay, he saw her again, thin and small and shaking inside a metal cage barely big enough for her to sit upright. She was not human. Her skin was pale blue, like ice, with strange white markings on her arms and neck. Her eyes were large and silver, almost glowing in the dark, and her ribs showed through her skin as if her body was forgetting how to live. She sat in the corner, holding a piece of hard bread, like it was a treasure. But she did not eat it. She just stared at it, her lips dry, her arms covered in bruises. She had not spoken once in the 3 weeks since Mason first saw her. She had not screamed or cried or begged. She just sat there like a ghost waiting for something that would never come. Mason stopped and stared. He had walked by her cage many times before. At first he thought she was part of some prisoner exchange or political deal between alien factions. But no guards watched her. No one brought her food. And everyone seemed to pretend she was not there. He watched 2 aliens walk past her without a glance. One of them laughed. The other spat near the cage. Something twisted in Mason's chest. He had seen bad things during the Outer Rim War, but this felt different. This was not a battlefield. This was a station run by law and order. At least it was supposed to be. He walked to the security office and asked the guard on duty, "Who is the girl in the cage?" The guard shrugged and barely looked up from his screen. "Some kind of stowaway or war trash or spy. Not our business. Not our species. Not our problem." Mason clenched his fists. "She looks like a child," he said. "She's starving. She needs help." The guard leaned back and looked at him for the first time. "If you care so much, go feed her yourself. Just don't come crying when command writes you up for interfering." Mason left without a word. He walked back to his quarters, opened his emergency ration pack, and stuffed some food into his jacket. Then he returned to the cage in silence. She did not look up when he knelt beside her. He held out a protein bar and a water bottle through the bars. At first she did not move. Then slowly she reached out. Her fingers were thin like twigs, shaking as she took the food. She unwrapped the bar and took a small bite. Then another. Then she stopped and looked at him. Mason did not say anything. He just nodded once and stood up. The next night, he came back with more food. This time she was waiting, still silent, still thin, but her eyes followed him. He tried speaking to her. "Can you understand me? What is your name? Where are you from?" But she said nothing, not even a whisper. He asked the other workers in the mess hall. No one knew anything about her. Some said she was a prisoner from a destroyed planet. Others said she was dangerous and had strange powers. Most said nothing at all. They had stopped seeing her. But Mason could not stop. He began noticing things. The bruises on her arms. The cuts on her face. Sometimes fresh. Sometimes healing. One night, he found her lying on her side, barely breathing. He shouted at the nearest officer. "She needs a doctor. She's dying." The officer laughed. "Then let her die. She's not one of us." Mason turned and walked away, but his hands were shaking. He was not angry. He was cold and silent. He started taking notes. Pictures. Video clips. He was going to find out who she was and why no one cared. The next day, he went to the station logs and searched the prisoner database. No name, no file, no record of her arrival. It was like she did not exist. But she did. She was real. And she was dying in a cage while everyone looked away. Everyone except Mason Lee. He could not save her yet, but he was not going to let her be forgotten. Not now. Not ever. Mason Lee did not sleep much after that night. The image of the girl's face, her shaking hands, her bruised arms, it would not leave his mind. He lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the station walls and the distant echoes of engines and cargo drones. Around him, the other humans snored or muttered in their sleep, unaware or uncaring of the silent, suffering locked in that metal cage. In the morning, Mason went to the station's central archive. He searched every crew, manifest, ship record, and incident report from the past 3 cycles. He searched for anything that mentioned a stowaway, a captured alien, a distress signal. Nothing came up. No name, no file, no origin. It was as if she had fallen from the sky and no one noticed. He walked the station's long halls, asking quiet questions with quiet words. To a security guard near the hangar deck, he asked, "Where did she come from?" The guard frowned and said, "One of the cargo ships brought her in from the Coron line. She was hiding in a waste pod. Surprised she's still alive. Don't get involved." To a mechanic near the oxygen farm, he asked, "Do you know what species she is?" The man looked up from his toolkit, wiped grease from his hands, and said, "They called her a Nezari. Thought they were extinct. Her kind got hit hard during the last war. Slaves and refugees, if any, left. They're not even on the council registry anymore." Mason made a note in his datapad. Nezari. He had heard the name once in a report from the Outer Rim, but barely remembered it. He typed it into the system. One result, a single line from an old military archive. Nezari homeworld burned during the Second Contact conflict. Survivors unknown. No known threat level. That was all. He walked past the food court where aliens of all shapes and sizes ate and drank and talked. Laughter and noise filled the air. No one talked about the girl in the cage. They walked past her every day. She was not hidden. She was just invisible. Back at the cage, Mason stood again beside the bars. The girl sat with her back against the wall, eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. He spoke softly. "Nezari, is that your kind?" She opened her eyes slowly and stared at him. He repeated the word, "Nezari." This time she blinked once, then twice, but said nothing. He held out a piece of fruit wrapped in a clean cloth. She reached forward slowly, like an animal afraid of being struck. Her fingers touched his for a second, and then she pulled back. She ate slowly now, as if learning how to chew again, as if her body no longer remembered. Mason sat on a crate nearby and watched her. She did not speak, but she did not turn away. He asked the medical officer of the human division if he could examine her. The officer laughed. "We're not authorized to treat non-registered life forms. You want to help a lost alien kid? Go ask the diplomats." So Mason tried that too. He contacted the Minor Alien Affairs desk and was told to file a report. He filed one. He heard nothing back. Later that night, Mason visited the cage again. This time, another human was already standing there. A tall man with a sharp uniform and cold eyes. Officer Delran, military advisor to the station chief. "You've been feeding her," Delran said. "Why?" Mason kept his voice calm. "Because no one else will." Delran shook his head. "She's a mistake. She was supposed to be transferred 2 weeks ago, but the paperwork got buried. No one wants to take responsibility for her. And now she's a problem. A forgotten one. Leave it alone." Mason looked through the bars. The girl's eyes were watching them both, silent and wide. "She's not a problem. She's a person." Delran leaned close and lowered his voice. "You want to keep your rank. You want to stay on this station. Then stop asking questions." He walked away without waiting for a reply. The next morning, Mason returned with a blanket, a small pillow, and more food. He found the girl curled up on the cold metal floor, arms wrapped around her knees. He opened the cage door quietly and stepped inside. He placed the blanket around her shoulders and set the pillow near her side. She flinched but did not move away. He handed her a can of water, and she drank with slow, careful sips. She whispered something then. One word. "Help." Mason froze. It was the first word he had ever heard from her. Her voice was weak but clear. She looked at him with eyes full of fear and hope and something else. Something deep. He nodded. "I will." From that moment, Mason knew he could not stop. He began recording everything. Every visit. Every bruise. Every time she cried out in her sleep. He used an old drone camera and hid it above the cage. He connected it to his private console and backed up the files in 3 locations. He had no plan yet, but he was building one. That night, he sent a message to Earth Command. He attached the first wave of videos and reports. He wrote a short message. Unknown life form, possibly Nezari, being held in violation of standard protocol. Requesting immediate review and medical evacuation. He sent it. Then he waited. The reply came 12 hours later. Flagged. Classified. Do not interfere further. This is not a human matter. Mason stared at the screen. His hands curled into fists. Not human matter. She was breathing. She was suffering. She had spoken. She had asked for help. He could not walk away now. He spent the next few days watching the cage more closely. He noticed the same alien worker passing by every night. A large bracken with a crooked spine and a cruel smile. One night, Mason hid behind a stack of crates and watched the bracken step up to the cage and jab a stick through the bars. The girl screamed softly and curled away. The bracken laughed and walked on. Mason stepped forward, grabbed the stick, snapped it in half. The bracken looked surprised, then angry. You want to protect her little soldier. You'll end up in a cage next. Try me, Mason said. The bracken left. But Mason knew it was not over. That night, he checked the drone footage, saved a copy of the attack, and added it to the file he would soon send to every news channel he could find. He did not care about his rank anymore. He cared about the girl in the cage. And he was not going to stay silent. Not while she still had breath in her body. Not while her voice could still whisper that one word. Help. The station lights flickered that morning as Mason walked through the east corridor toward the cage. He passed a row of cargo crates and old engine parts and heard voices behind him. They were not friendly. Low whispers, sharp laughs, boots hitting the metal floor with purpose. He did not turn around. Not yet. As he reached the cage, he saw the girl sitting in the same corner. The blanket he had given her was wrapped tight around her shoulders. The bruises on her arms were darker now, and her eyes were red like she had not slept at all. He knelt beside the bars and handed her a sealed protein pack. She took it with trembling fingers and gave a small nod. Mason smiled. It was the closest thing to trust she had ever shown him. Then a heavy voice echoed behind him. Feeding the pet, again, little human. Mason turned slowly. 3 brackens stood there, all tall and thick-skinned with long jaws and spike collars. The one in the center was the same who had jabbed her with a stick the night before. She's not your concern, the brackens said. Walk away while you still have legs to walk. Mason stood and faced them squarely. You touch her again, and I swear I'll make you regret it. The bracken grinned with rows of yellow teeth. You gonna fight for her? You think she's worth bleeding for? Mason did not answer with words. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small device, and pressed a button. A red light blinked. The drone above them was recording everything. The brackens looked up, then back at him. The leader growled, "You're a dead man." They turned and walked off, but the message was clear. Mason had made enemies. Later that day, his bunk was trashed. His locker broken open. The picture of his sister cracked in two. Someone had pissed on his blanket. He said nothing. He cleaned up in silence and downloaded the footage to his hidden storage drive. Every night, he brought food to the girl. Every night, he watched her grow a little stronger. She never spoke again, but her eyes said enough. She was alive. Barely, but still alive. And now others began to notice. One of the human engineers stopped him near the water pumps. He asked, "Is it true? You're feeding that alien girl?" Mason nodded. The engineer shook his head. "You're going to get yourself spaceman. She's not our problem. None of this is." Mason walked away, but the whispers followed him. In the mess hall, 2 aliens argued about the Nezari. One said her kind was cursed. The other said they were hunted for sport by raiders. Mason sat alone and listened. At the security checkpoint, a guard asked him for ID 3 times in one day. Mason knew the station was watching now. Even Commander Ricks called him in for a talk. The office was cold and lined with black monitors showing every part of the station. Ricks stood behind a steel desk, arms crossed, a grim look on his face. "You're causing unrest, Corporal." Mason stayed silent. "You are feeding a non-declared life form in a restricted zone. You are interfering with military order. You are being watched." Mason spoke calmly. "She's starving. She's beaten. She's a child." Rick stepped closer. "She's a threat. To who? To everything. To balance. To peace." Mason's jaw clenched. "She has not hurt anyone. Yet." Ricks pointed to the screens. "I am giving you one chance. Drop it. Forget her. And if I don't, then you will no longer be welcome on this station. Mason left the office with fire in his chest. He went straight to the cage. The girl looked up and tilted her head slightly, as if sensing the storm behind his eyes. He sat beside her and whispered, "I won't stop." That night the power cut for 2 minutes in Sector C. In those 2 minutes someone threw garbage at the cage. Plastic scraps, moldy food, even something sharp. Mason found her crying when he arrived. She was bleeding from a cut on her hand. He wrapped it with part of his shirt and stayed with her for hours. He checked the drone footage again. This time the face was clear. The same bracken. Mason added it to the evidence file and sent another message to Earth Command. Second request. Mistreatment recorded. Urgent medical help needed. He waited again. This time the reply was short. Investigation pending. Do not interfere. Mason cursed under his breath. He knew what that meant. No one was coming. He sat alone that night, staring at his datapad. The list of crimes against her was growing. Neglect, abuse, isolation, silence. The silence was the worst part. She never screamed when hurt. She never asked for more food. She never begged anyone but him. It was like she had given up on every voice except his. And now Mason felt the weight of that trust like armor and chain. He spoke with a friend in comms who owed him a favor. Together, they copied the footage onto a side channel, one that reached independent Earth media. It was a risk, but Mason had made his choice. He was no longer a quiet soldier following orders. He was a witness now. The next day, the Brackens did not come near the cage. But Mason found something else. A warning scratched into the wall outside his room. Your kindness will kill you. He smiled when he saw it. He had their attention now. The girl in the cage ate quietly that night. Her hands were steadier, her eyes less empty. Mason told her about Earth, about oceans and birds and music. She listened with her head tilted like a child hearing a story. She smiled once, just for a second, and that smile was worth every threat, every warning, every danger, because for one moment she remembered what it meant to be more than a number, more than a prisoner, more than forgotten. Mason stood and whispered one promise before leaving. I'll get you out, even if it meant breaking everything around him, even if it meant he could never go home again, because trouble had started, and it was not going to end quietly. Mason did not return to his quarters after that night. He stayed in a small service tunnel near the lower engine vents. It was hot and loud and filled with the hiss of steam and rumble of power coils. But it was hidden. He needed hidden now. The message he had sent through the comms relay had reached the outer network. Independent media stations across the Terran Belt were picking it up. The footage of the caged girl, her injuries, her silence, her fear. It was all going viral. Mason watched it on a cracked tablet screen. A reporter's voice talked about war crimes and forgotten aliens and the question of humanity. People were starting to ask, who was she? Why was she locked away? Why did no one help? And most of all, why did only one human care? Inside the cage, the girl sat with her back straight and her hands resting in her lap. She no longer flinched at sounds or sudden movement. She watched everything, eyes always wide, always waiting. Mason came to her each night now, at different times using different paths. He brought food, clean water, and soft cloth to wrap her hands. She had stopped shaking when he approached. She even leaned forward sometimes when she saw him coming. That was progress. He whispered stories about Earth, about rain and clouds, and wind across green fields. He talked about children running through streets, chasing each other with laughter. About his sister who built model ships from scrap and painted stars on their walls. The girl never interrupted, but she listened, and listening was its own kind of voice. Until one night when the silence finally broke. Mason was cleaning a small cut on her foot. She had stepped on a sharp corner inside the cage. She hissed at the pain, but did not pull away. Then she spoke. Her voice was dry and thin like wind passing through a crack in steel. Why? Mason looked up slowly. Why what? Why help? Mason's throat tightened. He had waited weeks to hear her voice. And now it came like the softest question in the galaxy. Because you're not an animal. You're not trash. You're someone. And someone should care. The girl looked down at her hands and whispered again. I was born in a cave on a broken moon. My people ran from fire and machines and voices with no faces. I do not know what peace is. I only know hunger. Mason sat beside the cage. He leaned back against the wall. What is your name? She shook her head slowly. No name now. Name gone. Mason tapped his chest. I'm Mason. You can borrow that name if you want. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Mason. He smiled. You can keep it until you find your own again. The next day the station was not quiet. Security teams moved through the corridors in groups. Officers whispered in corners and terminals locked without warning. Rumors spread like fire. A leak had occurred. A report had reached Earth High Command. People on the outer colonies were protesting. The name Nezri was trending across 4 systems. And someone had placed a printed image of the girl on a wall near the shuttle bay. It showed her sitting in the cage, eyes staring straight into the camera. Above, it were 4 words. She is still alive. Commander Rix held an emergency meeting. No one spoke of what was said. But after that, Mason was hunted. His access was restricted. His name removed from duty rosters. His quarters sealed. He was now invisible. But he was not afraid. He had lived through the Battle of Gorn Ridge. He had carried wounded friends across fire and steel. He knew what fear was. This was not fear. This was choice. And he had made his. He moved through maintenance shafts using stolen keys and old maps. He left coded messages for his few allies. He found extra food from quiet cooks who asked no questions. He never stayed in the same place twice. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a shadow, and still he came to the cage. Still he fed her. Still he spoke to her. Still she listened. One night, she reached through the bars and placed her hand on his. It was cold but steady. Thank you, Mason. Her voice was clearer now. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. You're going to get out. I swear. But escape was not simple. The cage was hardwired to the station's security grid. Only 2 people had clearance to override it. Commander Rix and Officer Delran. Both of them wanted Mason gone. He began to study the schedule. Shift changes, guard rotations, blind spots in the cameras. He memorized door codes and ventilation routes. He found an old escape pod in Dock 12 buried beneath broken shuttles. He cleaned it, tested the systems, and powered it down to sleep mode. When the time came, it would fly, but every hour the danger grew. Delran began setting traps. False signals. Fake calls for repair. One nearly caught Mason in a locked passageway. Another shut down the drone feed for 6 hours. Mason knew they were closing in, but he was close too. The girl now spoke a little every night. She asked about earth and oceans and sky. She said her people were singers and builders once. Before the war. Before the fire. She said her real name once. It was soft and long and impossible to say right in English. So Mason just called her Isla. She smiled at that. Isla. He said it like a promise. One day, the cage door opened without warning. Rick stood there, his face tight with anger. Mason stood between them without hesitation. You don't get to touch her. Rick stared at him. You threw away everything for this creature. Mason didn't blink. No, I remembered what it meant to be human. Rick laughed, then die like one. But he turned and walked away. No shots, no alarms, only silence. That night, Ilo wept for the first time. Not from fear, but from something older. Hope. Mason held her hand through the bars until sleep took her. He knew the end was coming soon, but he was ready, because the silence had broken, and with it the chains around her voice. And once a voice returns, so does freedom. The station lights dimmed early that night, and Mason knew it was time. He sat in the shadows just beyond a last cargo bay where the floor hummed with engine vibrations and the smell of metal filled the air like smoke from an old war. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from purpose. He checked the small pad in his hand and read the coded schedule one more time. Security shift change in 7 minutes. Maintenance crew rerouted to Sector 5. One silent window, 15 minutes long. He whispered to himself, "That is all we need." He moved like a shadow between crates and pipes, his feet soft on steel, his breath steady, as if the station itself had taught him how to move unseen. He reached the cage and found her waiting. Isla. She stood now and not just sat, stronger than weeks before, thinner still, but alive in her eyes. Mason pulled out the key, a stolen override chip hidden in the binding of a station manual from the commander's archives. He had risked everything for it. His uniform, his record, his name. He pressed it into the slot and waited. The door clicked. The lock released. For the first time in 32 days, the cage was open. She did not move at first, only looked at him. Then she stepped forward and touched his arm. I am ready. He nodded and handed her a small jacket. Too big for her, but warm. She slipped it on and followed him. They moved in silence through Corridor 7, past the oxygen filters, past the waste ducts, each step taking her farther from the place she had nearly died. Mason checked corners and listened for footsteps. None came, only the low voice of the station speaking in maintenance alerts. As they neared the side shaft, he paused and whispered, "There's a pod, old but working. I checked it myself. It will fly you out into the belt where a signal beacon waits. One of my contacts will pick you up within 2 hours." Isla looked at him. "And you?" He hesitated. "I will lead the guards away." She shook her head. "No." He smiled. "You have to go. If they catch us both, this was for nothing." She reached for his hand, held it. "You will come back." His voice was quiet. "If I can." The hangar was near. One corridor left, and the hum of search drones grew louder. Mason opened the last door and waved her through. There it was, the pod, covered in dust but charged and waiting. Its silver hull scratched, its nameplate unreadable, but its core thrummed with silent promise. He helped her inside, showed her the straps, the signal, the emergency rations. "When the hatch closes, hit the beacon. They will find you. Do not open it until you see another human ship." She nodded and looked at him one last time, her eyes wide and wet. Mason stepped back and closed the hatch. He turned to leave. Then the alarm sounded, a blaring cry across the station walls. Unauthorized access detected. They had been found. He ran, not away, but toward the center, toward the guards. He made noise. He let them see him. "There he is," someone shouted. "Sector 10. Mason ducked into a hallway and turned left then right. He saw boots behind him, voices angry and full of fire. He dropped a decoy charge, and the wall exploded with sparks. Smoke filled the air. He kept running. Back near the hangar, the pod powered up. Its lights blinked. Its thrusters clicked to life. Inside, Isla clutched the seat and stared at the red button. Her fingers hovered, then pressed. The pod released with a hiss and a burst of steam. It slipped into space like a whisper, gone before the cameras could focus. Mason reached the ventilation shaft. He crawled inside as the guards searched the hall. "The girl is gone," someone yelled. "Check all decks. They won't find her," he whispered to himself. "Not now. Not ever." He reached his old tunnel near the power coils and waited. His breath was sharp, his chest aching, but his heart was still beating. He smiled through blood and smoke. She was gone. Free. Alive. Later the station locked down. Every deck was scanned. Every ship stopped. But the pod was long gone. Commander Rix stood in the control room, staring at the empty cage. Delran cursed and smashed a screen. "She's not on the manifest. She never was." Rix turned slowly. Then she never existed. Mason's name was added to the wanted list. His face marked red on every station alert. Dangerous. Unstable. Do not approach. But no one found him. He stayed low, moved quiet, watched from shadows as the panic faded. A week passed. Then a message arrived. Encrypted. Hidden in a cargo manifest. A single word. Safe. No name. No signal origin. Just one word. He read it again and again. Safe. He leaned back against the cold wall and closed his eyes. He had done it. Not because he was a soldier. Not because he was ordered. But because he chose to be human when no one else would. He remembered the way her voice shook the first time she spoke. The way her eyes lit up when she heard the word ocean. The way she had whispered his name before the hatch closed. Mason. He had no medals now. No uniform. No station. But he had something better. He had kept a promise. And far beyond the stars, in a tiny ship flying through the dark, a girl with silver eyes and broken history was finally free. The walls of Archies 12 were quiet in the hours after the escape. Too quiet. Not the normal hum of machines, or the chatter of workers, or the growl of ships docking and leaving. This silence was different. This was the silence of something broken. Something the station could not fix. Commander Rix stood in the command bridge with cold eyes, scanning the surveillance feeds. He did not speak. He only stared. Frame by frame, he watched the footage of Mason unlocking the cage, helping the girl, guiding her through the halls like a ghost in the dark. And then nothing. The pod was gone. The girl was gone. Mason was gone. Security teams ran drills in every sector. Doors locked. Logs reviewed. Orders shouted into comms that echoed back with no results. Delran stood beside Rix, pacing back and forth. We should have spaced her when we had the chance. Now we have a leak. A message. A hero. Rix did not answer right away. Then finally he turned. He is still here. I can feel it. And Rix was right. Mason had not left the station. Not yet. He moved in silence between the vent shafts and power tunnels where only engineers and forgotten workers dared go. He ate old rations and slept between humming pipes. He listened to the chaos above him. And he waited, not because he was trapped, but because his job was not finished. The message from Isla had reached him. Safe. But he had not responded. It was better that way. No signal. No risk. Only silence. He watched the station change. People walked faster now. Guards stared longer. Whispers followed anyone in uniform. And slowly, one by one, others began to question. One night, a mechanic left a fresh canteen of water near a vent. No name, no message, just water. The next night, a medic placed a small cloth pack near the food waste chute. Inside were pain pills and a stitched bandage. Nothing else. And Mason understood. The silence was breaking. The story had reached Earth and beyond. The girl in the cage. The human who saved her. It was spreading. Mason knew he had to do one more thing. One last act before he left for good. He had to face them. Not for revenge, but for truth. He prepared carefully. He shaved using a broken mirror. Cut his hair with a wire blade. Cleaned his boots. Washed his jacket in coolant water. Then he stepped out of the shadows and walked into the main hallway like a ghost returning from war. Guards saw him. Eyes widened. Weapons raised. He lifted his hands slowly. Take me to Rix. They marched him through the upper deck. People stared from behind glass and doors. No one spoke. He was taken into the main control room, where Rix and Delran stood waiting. Delran smiled with no warmth. You really are stupid, coming back here like this. Mason stood tall. I never left. Rix stepped forward. You helped a known fugitive escape. You're guilty of treason. You're stripped of all rank and rights. Do you have anything to say? Mason looked straight at him. Yes. He turned toward the cameras lining the wall. He knew they were recording. He hoped someone out there was watching. She was a child. She was dying. And we did nothing. We turned our backs. Called her a threat. Called her a mistake. But she was just scared and starving and alone. And if caring about her is treason, then I accept it. I wear it proudly. Because the real crime was silence. Rix's face did not change. He gestured to the guards. Put him in the lower cell. Delran leaned closer and whispered, You'll vanish down there. No trial. No voice. No one will know. Mason smiled. Someone already knows. As they dragged him away, the lights flickered again. Somewhere across the station, an old terminal played a video on loop. The cage. The girl. The human kneeling beside her with food and water. The message. This is who we are when no one watches. A worker paused to watch it. Then another. Then 5 more. In the mess hall, screens began to flash. One by one. Wordless images of kindness and cruelty side by side. Rix stormed into the broadcast center. Who did this? No one answered. In the lower cell, Mason sat in chains. Cold floor. Dark ceiling. No light. But he smiled. Because he heard the whispers above. And he knew the station would not forget. Not this time. The next day, a message arrived from Earth Central. Open investigation into Archies 12. Review all prisoner treatment files. Hold Commander Rix and Officer Delran for questioning. The council wanted answers. But Rix did not plan to stay. He packed a case and activated a private shuttle. Delran joined him on the dock with a nervous look. This is falling apart. Rix nodded. We leave now. Blame the guards. Blame the system. Start again elsewhere. But as they boarded the ship, a figure stepped into view. Mason, wearing his uniform, standing tall. You're not going anywhere. Behind him stood 6 workers, 2 engineers, 1 medic, and a young alien translator holding a datapad. We're done being quiet. Delran reached for his weapon, but a wrench slammed into his arm. The medic caught the gun. Rick stepped back. You think this is justice? Mason walked forward. No, this is consequence. He pressed a button. The ship sealed. The dock locked. Rix and Delran were trapped. And the station, for the first time, breathed free. Mason turned to the others. You do not need to thank me. Just never forget her. And never forget what silence costs. Then he stepped back into the shadows, gone before the council ship arrived. His name never cleared. His record never restored. But across the stars, stories were told of a girl with silver eyes, of a man who stood alone, of a cage that was opened not with force but with courage. And in the hearts of many, that story never ended, because the fight for one voice was the beginning of many. The stars above Earth shimmered like frozen memories waiting to be remembered. In the silence between them, a signal pulsed faint and steady, carrying a name long forgotten by most, but remembered by the few who still whispered it in quiet places. Mason. In a small moon station far from Earth, a girl with silver eyes sat alone in the corner of a small observatory. She wore a soft blue robe and held a tablet in her lap. She had grown stronger, her hair longer, her face fuller, but the look in her eyes had never changed. She stared out at the stars and waited for something. Not rescue, not help, just a sign. Isla was now safe. The station had granted her asylum under new laws passed after the Archie scandal. She had been cleared, declared intelligent life, declared sentient. But none of that mattered to her, as much as the one person who had believed it long before the council ever did. Every night, she came here to send a single message. Encrypted, simple, endless. Come back. Not because she was weak, not because she was lost, but because he was not forgotten. Elsewhere in the black void of space, a ship moved slowly through asteroid fields and forgotten battle zones. Its hull was old but patched, its engine humming like a tired heart, refusing to stop. Inside that ship sat Mason. His beard was longer now, his jacket faded, but his hands were steady and his eyes sharp. He had no destination, no base, no allies, but he had purpose. He picked up weak transmissions from broken satellites and ignored every bounty placed on his head. He helped smugglers with broken NAV systems, helped abandoned miners reroute power, helped sick children in plague zones. And then he moved on. Everywhere he went, people asked, "Are you that Mason, the one from Archies?" He never answered. But sometimes, when the wind outside shook the hull, he would whisper, "She got out," and that was enough. One day as he passed through the outer rim of the Hydron Veil, his ship caught something, a signal, old code, encrypted. He decoded it by hand. Come back. His heart paused, then raced. The message had no origin marker, no location, but he knew. He adjusted his coordinates, turned the ship, and flew. The journey took 9 days through pirate lanes and dead sectors where ancient warships floated like tombs. He landed at the edge of the moon station, unregistered, unknown. Inside the control tower, Isla received a docking alert. Unknown ship, no weapons, no ID. Her hands trembled as she opened the gate. The door hissed, and he stepped through. Taller than she remembered, older, but the same. She ran to him, and he caught her without a word. They stood there in silence, breathing the same air after all this time, neither knowing what to say. Then she spoke. "I sent the signal every night." He smiled. "I heard it." She laughed and cried and held his hands like they might disappear if she blinked too long. He sat with her in the observatory and looked at the stars she watched every night. They talked of small things, of food and noise and dreams, and then of big things, of why he stayed away, of why he came back. She asked if he missed Earth. He shook his head. I miss only one place. She looked at him confused. Where? Here, next to someone who still believes in me. She smiled and held his hand tighter. Mason stayed on the station for several weeks. He fixed broken panels, helped the staff, shared stories with the young, and listened more than he spoke. But soon whispers spread again. The council wanted answers. They had found his trace. They were coming. This time, he did not run. He stood on the landing deck when the council ship arrived. He met their officers with calm eyes and slow breath. The lead officer asked him, "Are you the fugitive known as Mason?" He answered, "I am the man who opened a cage." The officer looked at Isla, standing behind him. "And who is she to you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "She is the reason I remember who I am." The officer stepped forward with cuffs. Mason raised his arms. Then another voice spoke from the crowd. It was the station director. She held a data pad. "He is under our protection. He saved lives. He broke no law on this station." The officer hesitated, checked his orders, checked the faces watching, and finally lowered the cuffs. "We will report this." Mason nodded. "Do that." They left, and he stayed. Isla sat with him that night and asked, "Will they come again?" He answered, "Always, but we will be ready." They looked at the stars again. The same stars, the same silence. Only now, they were not alone. Years passed. The girl became a leader. Her voice carried through council halls. Her eyes told stories that others had tried to bury. Mason became a teacher. He taught mechanics, taught honor, taught truth without speeches. Children called him captain, but he only smiled. One day a small child asked him, "Why did you save her?" He looked out at the stars and said, "Because one voice, even small, is louder than silence if someone listens." And from that day forward, every station carried a small plaque. Simple, shining. Do not forget the cage. Do not forget the hand that opened it. Some say Mason vanished again. Some say he watches from shadows, still helping, still listening. But on quiet nights when the stars shine bright over the moon station, a silver-eyed woman looks out and smiles, because the signal was answered, because the silence was broken, and because one human refused to stay silent.